Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess and this is my ADHD lifestyle, and today we are back for another ADHD reviews. This time we are covering a topic that I have talked about a little bit in the past, but we are doing Notion today. So Notion is an online planning and project management tool, and you can use it for teams as well as for individual purposes. I'm going to talk about it more on an individual level. Before I get into that, please, if you enjoy this video and you learned something, please like. If you really enjoyed the video, you can leave a comment. If you're interested in my channel and what I do here, you can subscribe. And if you really love my content and you think it's the best thing on the internet, you can hit the bell icon to get notified every single time that I post. Also, we are back in my messy office because I still have not solved for the issue where my rabbit eats my microphone cords. That's why we're here, in case anyone was wondering. Yeah, if I'm filming in here, just assume it's because my rabbit has started doing something that I did not anticipate him doing. Now, I mentioned Notion in my New Year's resolution video and that I was starting to use it. I am about 4 months into using it now, 3 or 4. What day is it? Anyway, so I've been using it for 3 to 4 months now, and it has been helpful, and I'm going to talk about why it's been helpful and how I've been using it in this video, and I will hopefully include some screenshots and some screen recordings for that. For now, I'm going to focus on the camera and just kind of tell you guys what's going on, and we'll see when this gets edited how it ends up all mixed together. Notion, as I mentioned, is an organizational planning tool. Particularly, it is considered an agile planning tool. If you don't know what agile planning is, it's not going to have a ton of bearing on what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to get into like a huge long definition of it, but basically it's a way of organizing information that is involved with one single large project usually. One of the really good examples of this is if you work in the software industry in any capacity, whether that be web development or like IT, a lot of times those teams will use agile planning to keep track of the projects that they're working on. And Notion is one of the tools you can use to do that. There's actually a ton of tools you can use for this. Notion is just the one I'm reviewing right now. If you're interested in me reviewing other agile planning tools in the future, comment down below and maybe I'll do that. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to focus on Notion since it was the one that I found as a way to kind of combat some of the issues I was having with planning my personal projects in my life. So like I said before, Notion can be used personally or by a team. I primarily use it for personal use, meaning I get to use it completely for free. I don't really have to worry about paying for it and connecting a bunch of people to it. I do have my friend who edits these videos sometimes for me. She is connected to one of my boards so she can see kind of my calendar of things that I am working on as far as YouTube goes, and she can kind of get an idea of like what my schedule for that is in case she needs to work on something. So if you only have like one other person you're collaborating with, this is a great tool for that as well. However, in this video, I'm going to focus on how I personally use it. I am going to talk about the YouTube stuff. She's in there, but it's more to see what I'm doing with it and less to like assign things to her because I don't need to assign things to her. I trust her to get things done if she tells me she's going to do it. So that all being said, let's get into it. So primarily I started using Notion because, as you know, I finished the first novel in a fantasy series that I started writing in 2019 and 2020. Because I'm kind of trying to get that all organized and put together so that I could ultimately hopefully publish it, I decided that I wanted to create an online digital database of important references, information, and guides for both myself that a literary agent or editor could use. For example, a lot of writers use something called Scrivener, and I just chose Notion instead because it's supposed to be supplementary, whereas Scrivener is something you can literally write in. So ultimately what made me decide Notion would be better is because I was looking for something I could use as a database rather than something I could like literally write in and on. Yeah, because I would just prefer to do the writing in like a Google Doc. I'm just used to it. However, that means that a lot of the things I'm going to be showing you are basically just references I've created for myself to have when I need them. So I'll kind of discuss why I'm doing certain things certain ways and also talk about the ways in which I think Notion is going to be most effective for most people, or at least people who are using it for what I'm going to suggest using it for ultimately. So another reason that I chose to use Notion is because I actually reached out to a writing Discord server and was like, hey, what do you guys think I should use? I'm kind of looking for something to keep writing reference in. And the reason I ultimately chose Notion was that I could mix things that were not directly related into my writing into it, whereas I feel like that would be a little bit more difficult with something like Scrivener or Campfire for that matter. I just decided that this was the best way to do things for my purposes. In addition to this, I was already familiar with Agile planning and Agile planning tools, so Notion was the one that I had the most familiarity with, and that was part of the reason that I went for it. Also, it was free to use. Certain other tools that I was looking at were not, so that was one of the reasons, because if I started using it and I stopped using it rather quickly, which happens pretty often with those of us with ADHD, no harm, no foul. So speaking of things that, if I don't use it, no harm, no foul, let's talk first about the things that I built out and then ultimately wound up not using, and why I ultimately stopped using them. Now, you can see here that I built out this cute little page. It's like, it says Jess's Galaxy on it, and if you don't know, my, pseudonym is Jess Galaxy. That's why my Twitter handle is Jess Galaxy. Basically, I decided to kind of build out this little page, and honestly, I don't use these checkboxes, nor do I really use the subpages on here. I do use the TBR list. That is one thing that I do use. TBR being my to be read list. Mostly the reason that I don't use these is I really wish I could set these checkboxes to just re-up every day, so that if I forget to use them, I don't have to re-up them, if that makes sense. I just kind of wish it was a little bit more automatic. They're not, and that's fine. And so I just kind of realized that this maybe wasn't the best way for me to use Notion. So ultimately, I think this page was useful in that way because it helped me figure out that maybe I shouldn't be using it this way, but also it helped me figure out how to actually build pages. So that was something that was really helpful about this particular page that I built. This was one of the very first pages I built. So for the subpages I did use for a while, I'm not using them anymore for various reasons. The ones I used the most were, for example, I built out a Kanban board for my job hunt. But the reason I did that was because it allowed me to pretty much keep track of, did I need to do something for someone? Had I lost it? Was I not getting contacted back? Or, do I need to do this, that, or the other thing? As an additional bit of information, but a Kanban board is just basically a place where you have tickets which represent tasks. So that could be anything from general to-dos like I need to clean my bunny cage. And then you have columns which represent what state of being done those are in. So the simplest Kanban board you would have would be open to-dos and then in progress and then complete in the various columns. And basically that just allows you to keep track of basically what irons you have in the fire and what you've completed and what you still have to do. You can kind of see why this works really well for software planning and management and creation. I want to talk about this page since I'm already on it. I don't use it a ton, but I do use it a little bit. But for example, if you look at this task, I've actually created this task which was to set up Shiro's pen before I got him. And as you can see in here, I have smaller tasks which fit inside this task, such as buying the cage, getting a mat to go under it, getting fencing for around it, and then ultimately that all led up to putting together the bunny page. So it allowed me to kind of break down what I needed to do and everything I needed to get done before I completed the task, which makes it a little bit easier to kind of tackle certain things. This can be really, really hard for those of us with ADHD to set up though. And so I don't think it would work for every single task out there, but it did work for this one since it was very physical and it was very easy for me to sit down and go, okay, I need a water bowl, I need a cage, I need a mat for underneath the cage, and I need fencing. And then I could kind of put together the task and I could go, okay, and I can check things off as I, bought them or they arrived, however I wanted to do that. So that is an option that you have in this situation. Some of the other pages that are kind of here, these subpages, such as the calendar, they're already built into Notion when you start using it. So the fact that I don't use it isn't a big deal for me. Most of the reason that I don't use these things, so for example, quick notes, appointments, events, this calendar, my recipes page, is just I tend to have systems in place already for dealing with those things, so I didn't need to put it into Notion. I might use the recipes eventually just because there are a few recipes that I have developed on my own that I've never really sat down and written out, and I probably should. And this might be a good place to do it because it is in a cloud environment and I can always access it, and that way I never have to worry about what Google Doc folder is that in? It'll just always be in the Notion recipes page. Yeah, so that's something that I don't use on here that was kind of just automatically there. However, even if you you do set something like this up, all of these are like pre-made templates. So for example, I think I put the recipes card or the recipes subpage in there myself because I thought it might be useful, and then I ultimately didn't use it. But it's a pre-built page, so I just clicked like 2 things and then I had a recipes page. So it's not like a really, really big deal when you don't end up using the things that you've set up in Notion, which I kind of like a lot about it, because honestly, if I'm going to use a planning tool, I don't want to have to put a ton of effort into it, because ultimately when it comes down to it with ADHD, if I create this planning tool and I spend all of this time making this system that I think is going to work, and then in 3 weeks it's not working for me anymore, I'm going to be really disappointed and I'm going to be out that time. And I think this is one of the ways that Notion could be really, really helpful to those of us in the ADHD community, because it has these pre-built templates. There's not a lot of that front-loaded time spend, which makes it a little bit easier for us to use it without, running into a situation where we have spent a lot of time and effort on something that ultimately isn't going to work for us. I mentioned before, I do use the reading list. I also use this journal sometimes. It's got a pre-built template in it that allows you to kind of like think about what you have to do for the day and just kind of do some like mindfulness exercises. And I like that. I don't use it as like a general journal, mostly because I would prefer to handwrite a general journal. And so I have like I'm gonna go bullet journal that I write in primarily. It's not very pretty. Most of what I'm doing right now is putting stickers in it and then writing about said stickers. Comment down below if you want to hear about that. So those are kind of the main pages of my Notion, and a little bit about why I do or do not use them. And that main page, that Jess's Galaxy page, I do still look at it because I like the pictures that are on it and I like the quotes that I put on it. So it is good for just like banking those things, and I can just kind of go and be like, yeah, that John Muir quote is great. I like this photo, for example. So it is good for that, at least. It could be a little bit of it'd be really good for building inspiration boards and like mood boards, which I haven't done with it in the traditional sense, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now I'd really like to talk about where I think Notion rises to the occasion and could be really, really helpful for anyone with ADHD, which is project, reference, and research management, or organization. That can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, so let me give you an idea of what I mean, because ultimately when it comes down to it, Notion is about building systems that you think are going to work exclusively for you. So I think that it's going to have the D&D 5e problem, where it seems like there's a lot of rules, but actually a lot of it is up to the interpretation of the dungeon master, which means you are going to have to make a lot of decisions. So just kind of keep that in mind, and you are going to have to think about what is working and what is not. So this is the best explanation for that I have. However, before I go on with everything I'm about to say, speaking of D&D, anyone who is in the D&D campaign that I am currently running, meaning if you are, I'm just going to list your names: Nina, Molly, Deanna, Danny, or Spacey. Do not watch this. I will put a timestamp here. Jump to said timestamp, because otherwise I'm just going to spoil things for our D&D campaign for you, and that's not going to be fun. But I really want to talk about it in this video, so deal. So I think showing you guys what I did to build out my D&D notes and campaign information is a really good example of what you can kind of do with Notion that might be really useful to people who have hobbies like Dungeons and Dragons, who write a lot, whether that be fan fiction or original work, as well as anyone who maybe is a student in school and needs to keep track of like information and notes from all of their classes. So I think Notion has a lot of really, really great features for creating note databases, I guess is what I'm going to call them, reference notes. But anyway, on my main page for my campaign, I obviously have a link to the Google Doc I use to just jot things down during session, which is just, I can access it quicker that way. So each of the subpages on this page are fairly self-explanatory. This one that says Desta is actually just a list of the rules of the world. The world that they're playing in is called Desta. That is the name of the literal planet that they are on. This was not just an excuse for me to talk about my D&D campaign, I swear. This important NPC page is really useful for me, especially when I just need to bring certain things back up. One of the things that happens in my campaign is there is a particular NPC who runs a magic shop that exists in several large cities throughout the world. So I can always just jump straight into her important NPC page, just look at what she's got, talk about what she's doing, and remember what she looks like, because sometimes it's hard to remember what characters look like in D&D because you're making it up. One thing about this important NPCs page also to keep in mind is this is not a table page, this is an inline table. And what that basically means is it allows me to put things above, around, in it a little bit easier than when you do a table page. As you kind of play with the different Notion tools, you'll find that certain ones are a little bit more flexible. I tend to prefer to use a blank page and then add inline things on it because it allows me to move them around a little bit better. Like for example, if this was a table page, I wouldn't be able to take notes underneath this table, which I don't think is super useful, which is why I particularly am using it this way. And that's why I'm kind of making a big deal about it. Like the towns page, for example, is actually just a list of subpages. Each subpage is a breakdown of everything that's in that town. Some of them are much longer than others. Some of them I've just got a couple of notes on because they're related to one of my player characters and I might need to reference that or I need to know that information if it comes up. Other than that, these are just like large breakdowns of various things in the cities, inns, people that might be there, important NPCs that might be there, so on and so forth. Basically what I'm getting at, and I kind of mentioned this already, is that Notion is really awesome for DM organization, and I think because it could be really, really awesome for organizing other things like this. So if you are maybe a cosplayer and you have a lot of different projects going on at once, or maybe you're a professional sewer, you can kind of keep, or like a professional seamstress. I said sewer as if that's the word for that. So if you're like a professional seamstress, this would be a really good place to kind of keep notes about different projects and things like that. If you're in school, making sub-pages for each of your classes within a semester and keeping track of readings and reading notes versus class notes. Like I've mentioned before, when I was in school especially, one thing that was really, really helpful for me was taking notes by hand. And I've said this before, but I only figured this out in like my senior year of college. But if you take notes by hand and then you go type them up in a Google Doc, that'll help you review your notes. And I think this could work similarly and might be a little bit more organized than like a folder full of random Google Docs, just because you can kind of flip through things a little bit more seamlessly than you could in a Google Doc. Yeah, and they're both free, so like whichever one works better for you basically. Moving on from D&D stuff, not getting out of the fantasy realm because my entire life is fantasy. Oh, I should have put the ears on. I'm gonna put them on. I made my entire life as a fantasy joke, so we're putting on the elf ears. This is probably the area where my D&D players will be coming back in, so you guys are just going to be confused by the elf ears. The most built out area of my Notion is the area where I'm keeping all of the information about my fantasy series. I mentioned previously that this is a lot of the reason that I started using Notion, so I am going to talk about this quite a bit. For my series, I have 2 pages, sub-pages that are entirely focused on my 2 main characters who are kind of the core of the story. I tend to write character-driven stories, so this was really important for me. Also, I'm going to be getting some like official artwork done for myself to have to just like look at and be like, ah, yes, my characters. And so part of the reason that I did that was because if I wrote this down and I had it all like together, it would be way easier for me to go to an artist and be like, here are what these characters look like, can you draw them for me? Also, it helps me a lot because as I'm writing, sometimes I'll be like, Aesith's eyes are what color? Which I run into just a lot. Like I had a very clear vision of how one of these characters looked in my head, and then the other one I was like, yeah, he has gray eyes, no, he has green eyes, now he has blue eyes, his hair was black and then it was silver and then it was white and then it was silver again. You can just see that I just needed to have some kind of official reference where I was like, okay, this is what he is supposed to look like in canon. So I will fully admit I have this plot outline thing. It does not really exist because I'm in the process of writing the second book, and I only like recently really narrowed down what I wanted to do with that and where I wanted to go with the series beyond what happens in the first book. So I have not like sat down and written plot outline for this series, but that will be there eventually. I'm going to do it. And then I have this references page. Again, this page is just a list of subpages, much like I have for the D&D campaign. It's got a lot of important information about systems of government, different places in the world, different people in the world that are important, the people that aren't main characters that I need to know how they look if I need to go back, as well as just like important terms that I have created for the series, as well as terms that I am using throughout the series that I maybe didn't create but are relevant and important and should be consistent. For example, one of them is the capital. In my first draft of the doc, I kept like, sometimes it was lowercase, sometimes it was spelled with an A instead of an O. Thank God for my editor. She helped me fix that. And by my editor, I mean my friend Nina, who did a developmental edit on this novel for me. Not that she's not an editor, I just mean I'm not like in like a stage where I have an agent and have an editor. That's what I'm really getting at. But she was really helpful. So ultimately this isn't too different from my D&D stuff, but I just kind of wanted to show you another way you can use it. Obviously, there's more paragraphs, there's a lot more photos on this one where I'm kind of keeping track of how people look and how things look and what I'm thinking of, and sometimes I put things in there. Like on Ace's page, I have this picture of this rabbit because I feel like rabbits are very indicative of his personality. So that's something that I put in there. This one's gonna be a lot shorter than my HelloFresh review. Ultimately, I think Notion could be really, really great for the right person with ADHD, which is exactly what I said with HelloFresh, but we're all different, so we're all gonna handle things differently. If you're pretty good at going, oh, you know, I wanna keep track of this, I'm gonna write it down somewhere, Notion is pretty good for being that one place where you can write everything down and then you can always access it no matter where you are, since you can just log into your Notion from anywhere. Much in the same way that any cloud-based software as a service is going to be very helpful. And I think ultimately where it really, really shines is like reference organization and information organization. And that can be really, really helpful for those of us with ADHD to create a system that makes sense to our brains. Granted, might take some legwork. Notion makes a lot of that legwork easier, which is why I think it could be very beneficial to the ADHD community. So something else you might have noticed, and I'll show it hopefully on the screen, but on the homepage, I did write out, my life will never be in one place, and that's okay. Notion, when you build like a homepage like this, like the default phrase is like, my life in one place. And I just kind of, as an ADHDer, I saw that and I went, yeah, it's not though. My life is never going to be in a single place, and that's really okay. Like, it's really okay that my Notion is a place where I keep information and references and things I might need to go back to, and I might not look at it for 3 weeks, but ultimately that information is still gonna be there when I need to go back and look at it. So I think Notion could be really, really useful in that way, and it would allow someone with ADHD to kind of keep those and, you know, maybe pick it up every now and again. You know, maybe you forget about it and then you pick it up and you start using it, and it's done in a way that it's like you haven't wasted that thing. Something that happens to me sometimes with physical planners is if I don't really like the planner, I'll end up going back and using it like 3, 4, 6 months later, and I'll realize like I've now wasted like 6 months worth of this planner. It's not as useful. I'm gonna take the ears off. But, you know, you've realized you've wasted that physical thing. Notion isn't a physical object, so it allows you to go back to it without any of that guilt. And, you know, if you do feel inclined to pay for it for some reason, like you want a particular feature, I don't think any of their features are locked though. But if you do find a reason that you're like, okay, I kind of want to pay for Notion, I don't think it's very expensive for personal use. I think it's like $10 a month. I will confirm that and put it on the screen. And because of that, there's a little bit less pressure to keep using it. It is fairly cheap, or you can use it for free. And that means you're not going to feel bad when you ultimately don't use it. When you talk about the ADHD task and things that you kind of forget about and ultimately end up paying for, this is one of those situations where I think you can kind of get around that and you won't fall into that trap. And I think that is one of the biggest things for me that's very helpful, because like there have been times when I've forgotten to use it for a few months. And if it would have been something that I had paid $30 to $50 for, like Scrivener, for example, I would have been kind of upset with myself for it. Granted, Scrivener is not a subscription service. It is like a one-time fee. So like that was just the first example. Creative Cloud might be a better example, where it's really expensive and it's a subscription. So if you forget to use it or you're not using it a lot, it feels like you're just kind of wasting that money, and you can kind of get caught in this like, oh, F again? I didn't mean to do that. And so I think Notion kind of avoids that. One of the things I do want to mention about Notion before I go is the fact that it could very easily cause you to hyper-focus on organization rather than something you need to do, because it is really easy to spend a bunch of time just building out pages and pages and pages in Notion and not getting anything done. It does help a lot that you can just jump in and use a template, and then you kind of avoid that problem a little bit, but it is something that I do want to call out. If that's something that you have a big problem with, Notion might not be a really good choice for you unless you're like forcing yourself to stick to the templates. Now, I will also say Notion gives you access to all of their templates that they've created as well as other people's templates. So you can get online and find other people's templates and just kind of start using them, which is really, really helpful if they've made those templates public. So you can sometimes find templates for like Dungeons and Dragons or a novel organization or a plot outline. So if those are things that you think would work really well for you, especially in the study realm or like the personal organization realm, so like keeping track of bills and things like that, this will allow you to just kind of pop them in and get going, which is good. And it does kind of prevent the issue of running into that hyper-focusing on organization issue. However, I will admit that there were times when I probably should have been working on editing my novel or writing my novel, and instead I was sitting there like finding the perfect picture to put on Asith's page, or I was making pic crews of my two main characters and things like that. So that is something to keep in mind. It can provide a level of distraction into your work situation. At the same time, it was very useful for me to constantly have it open when I was doing those things, even though sometimes it would distract me. So that is one thing that I did want to call out. And I kind of did mention as well, but I mentioned it briefly, that like when you create, say, a calendar and then you're like, oh man, this would have been more useful if it was like a Kanban board. That is one thing that Notion does really well, is you can just really pivot what you're doing. So if you've put a bunch of tasks, like for example, my video schedule, if I've put a bunch of those tasks into a calendar and then I'm suddenly like, oh man, I should have made this a Kanban board. What was I thinking? I can then just click on it and be like, make a Kanban board for me, and it'll make that Kanban board for me, and then I can start moving things around that way. And it will keep the dates that I've added to those tasks via the calendar, which is kind of helpful. And because it has this ability to pivot, I think it is very, very useful for someone who maybe doesn't know exactly what systems are going to work well for them, because they can ultimately then just go and be like, okay, this isn't working, I'm going to switch it, without doing all of the legwork all over again. So those are kind of my two big things when it comes down to Notion and ADHD, is be wary of the fact that you could end up hyper-focusing on organization, and also be mindful of the fact that if you have done a lot in Notion and set a whole system up that ultimately doesn't work for you, it's pretty easy to just shift it into something else that might work better. Those are my biggest things. I am going to give like a full star review for this one, since I did do like the whole like limes thing in the ADHD reviews. I'm going to give this 4.75 out of 5 stars, mostly because I think it is adaptable in a way that is very, very good for those of us with ADHD, and I think it could be very, very useful for the people that need to build a system that might only work for them. And I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, if you do need to, say, bring someone else in to collaborate with on something, it's pretty easy to set that up, and it's free, so you're not going to run into a bunch of issues where you've forgotten about the subscription and end up paying money that you didn't mean to pay, or end up paying for something that you haven't been using anyway. And it also is a cloud environment, so you can access it from anywhere, and I think that is also very good and very helpful. Also, I know 4.75 out of 5 is kind of an obnoxious score, but this is my series, so I'm allowed to do what I want. Honestly, I think if anything about Notion piqued your interest, I would highly recommend just going and giving it a shot, because it's free. Ultimately, it's free, and you might as well try it. That's kind of how I feel about tools like this in general, is if it's completely free for you to use or try, it's probably worth it. Also, as a side note, if you are a writer, consider gathering all your notes into a Notion page. It is very helpful. It has been very, very helpful to me. So if you are looking for something similar and you are a writer, I would probably give this a 5 out of 5 for that, just like that subcategory, that particular use case of I'm a writer and I need a place to keep all my notes. Notion is perfect for that. Anyway, that's it for me today. If you use Notion, or you like Notion, or you have a score of your own for Notion, feel free to share it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your opinions on Notion and how you feel about using it, and if you've used it before, or if you've used it to collaborate, or if you've used it for work. That would be really cool. I would love to hear about that. Unfortunately, because of when I did this, I didn't get to include any of my work tasks in it, so there might be an update in the future where I talk about Notion from the perspective of using it for work tasks and work projects, but we will see. If you're interested in that, put it down below. Since you made it to the end of the video, we are going to do a word of the day today. The word of the day today is agile planning, and I know it is a phrase, but it's fine. Agile planning is a concept which comes from software development, Agile practices involve discovering requirements. Oh god, I'm just gonna need to read it. Agile practices involve discovering requirements and developing solutions through the collaborative effort of self-organization and cross-functional teams and their customers or end users. This is just a very fancy way of saying that they all work together and use the same tools to organize their tasks and complete the projects that they're working on. So if you made it to the end of this video, please put the word of the day in the comments down below. That would really help me out. It's for engagement. It makes the YouTube algorithm really like me, and they currently don't like me because the last video I put out got copyright claimed. On that note, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, do all of the YouTube things. My voice is suddenly going. Have a great day. I hope you find organizational systems that work for you. Yeah, bye guys. Very close to the camera right now. How's that? Oh yeah, can't see my pajama pants. Okay, so another reason that I chose to work with Notion in this particular... I don't know what Shira just did, but he did something. Forgot to mute all of my shit. Why? Why have I gotten so many phone calls from Texas? Hello? Literally taking any excuse possible to put these on lately. I think they just, if I just get the fucking elf ears on and keep going. Yes, I have both elf ears and like hobbit ears. What color is Aethith? I'm having a rough time today, guys.